Okay, welcome to the April 23rd Board and Conference, Business and Conference meeting of the School District of Haverford Township. If I could ask you to please recite the Pledge of Allegiance, looking at this beautiful picture of the flag. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic
for which it stands,
one nation,
under God, indivisible,
liberty
and justice for all.
Thank you, everybody. Mr. Regal, could you call the roll, please?
Dr. Crispin?
Here.
Mr. Fleischer? Mr. Fleischer? I'll come back to Ms. Larson?
Here.
Ms. Mingy? Ms. Mingy?
Everyone should go off of mute.
You need to unmute.
You can hear me now.
Yes.
Yes.
Mr. Cinto?
Here.
Mr. Schwartz?
Here.
Ms. Snodgrass?
Here.
Ms. Wiedemann?
Here.
Mr. Feinberg?
Here.
And Mr. Fleischer, you're here, right?
Yes, can you hear me?
Yes. Okay.
All present and accounted for. Thank you, Bob. I'll accept a motion to approve the official minutes from the April 2nd, 2020 regular public board meeting.
Mr. Cinto moved.
Crispin, second.
Bridget Mead.
Moved in second. Any discussion? All in favor?
Aye.
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 Any
Aye.
opposed?
Aye.
Any opposed? Motion carries. Thank you very much. Nobody has signed up in advance for public session this evening. Ms. Deacon, have you received any email comments?
No one has emailed to speak this evening.
Okay. Just for general information, I can tell you that we have, in addition to the board members and staff on the meeting, right now we have 26 members of the public in attendance. So thank you. Our next item is student reports. And first is our middle school student report from Hannah Swarthing. Hannah?
Hello. Thank you for allowing me to present. The middle school is communicating all of their mass information through the weekly newsletter, which is sent out on Sunday afternoon. Teachers, counselors, and administrators begin hosting office hours on Tuesday. Most staff offer a morning and afternoon time to support students with any questions. Personally, I haven't had the opportunity to do office hours because I've been working on my schoolwork, and I've been trying to open my schedule to that. Also, I wanted to let you know what a typical week and day are like for me. My week starts on Monday when I check the newsletter, then I go to Google Classroom and complete the assignments. The assignments are also posted on Google Calendar along with the office hours, which makes documents and information easily accessible. A typical day of work usually takes me 1 to 2 hours, which is understandable, at least for me, judging by the fact that I have 7 classes to work with. The amount of work is challenging enough for me. For example, I had an interesting read in social studies about slavery, and when I do get a challenging assignment, it is never dry or boring, but interesting and factual. I usually go by the class periods I would be in. For example, I'll start with my first period, science, then go from there. Most of the time, I would also FaceTime my friends while doing this. Although I do enjoy the company, my friends help me make my work more fun and help answer any questions I have since we all have the same material. Also, if I missed an announcement or assignment, my friends could also tell me about it. I think we can all agree that the word quarantine has a negative connotation to it, but there can be some pros to this whole situation. For example, people may have more free time to get chores done or get some exercise. Also, by using Zoom and Google Hangouts, people could chat with family and friends. However, there is a downside. Trips and events that were scheduled for later on in the school year were canceled, along with sports. People who were really looking forward to that, such as myself, were disappointed. With the use of online school also came challenges. Personally, I had a hard time focusing in the beginning of flexible learning due to the facts that 1, I was used to learning in a classroom environment, and 2, with the access of devices and even video games so close to me, definitely proves as a distraction. The funny thing is, just as I was about to answer the last question on this document, one of my friends called me about an assignment she had to do for math. A lot of my friends confided in me about how the math project we're doing had been overly stressful for them because they have to create a whole game based on math. Personally, it wasn't a problem, but that could have been due to the fact that I understood it better than them, or I chose a different option. One of my friends told me that the option she chose for the project was extremely stressful for her, so I recommended she chose a different option or watch a tutorial. However, she calmed down after realizing she knew what to do. So in conclusion, even if an assignment is stressful, if you just stop and think, you'll be fine. Thank you for supporting and leading our community, families, and students. Please stay safe.
Thank you, Hannah. You stay safe too. Next is our high school student report, Elizabeth Jocelyn.
Hi, my name is Elizabeth Jocelyn, and I am a senior at Haverford High School. Thank you for inviting me to this very unique school board meeting. Usually I write these board reports throughout the day on the Thursday of, gathering up information from my peers and teachers, emailing back and forth with club sponsors and our athletics director, Joanne Patterson, to make sure I have the necessary details for my report. Most weeks I actually have to make cuts because my report is too long, prioritize certain events and activities, save something for a later board meeting. I have to cut down my reports because at Haverford High School, there is such a variety of constant activity happening in that building. It is the hub of this community. If life had continued on like normal following March 12th, 2020, I would have presented a school board report on March 19th. At that meeting, I imagine I would have talked about the spring show 9 to 5, choral cabaret, evening of jazz, the major success of the voter registration drive, and certainly the early triumphs of all of our spring athletic teams in the beginning of their seasons. And that would be just 1 week of activities. Obviously, things are a little different. I'd be lying to you all if I said the events of the past month weren't disappointing in every way. Not just to me, not just to the senior class, but to the entire student body. But here's the thing about disappointment. You can only be disappointed if you had something to look forward to. And at Haverford High School, every week is filled with fundraisers, sporting events, concerts, meetings, spirit days, and activities to look forward to. Something I've noticed spending so much time on social media these days is that there's something different about the disappointment Haverford seniors feel compared to the surrounding high schools. Surrounding high school seniors are disappointed about prom and graduation. Haverford seniors are disappointed about not being in class, not seeing their valued teachers, not supporting their peers on the bleachers, not walking through their elementary schools. There's something really, truly special about the environment that has been cultivated in our school district. So this great disappointment reminds me of how grateful I am to have been a part of this district and everything it has to offer. This is a special place. Most kids don't say that about their high school. Haverford is the exception. But of course, we're still trying to learn. It's been an adjustment for everyone, but one thing that's clear is how much teachers care for their students. They send personalized emails to check in, connect with us during office hours, and spend their time preparing meaningful lessons that keep us learning at home. Everyone is facing different challenges. For me, I've actually been working full-time at CVS since March 13th. Trying to juggle my schoolwork while working in an essential store has its own difficulties, but my teachers are incredibly supportive and flexible, allowing me to make it all work. Anyone in this community may say they know what would work best for the school district. What's clear is that there's no definitive right way to tackle this. Our teachers and administrators' support to us it means so much to us and continues to be the best part of a Haverford education. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Elizabeth. You stay safe. Before I hand it over to Dr. Rushi for her superintendent comments, I'd just like to take a minute and make some comments myself. I want to stress again how much we want to thank our doctors and nurses and other medical personnel who are on the front lines for us here. Certainly want to acknowledge the police, firemen, and other first responders, the township personnel that are continuing to work, our sanitation workers, postal workers, other delivery people, grocery workers, and other essentials, folks who are continuing to be out there, and we don't take that for granted, and we wish them to be safe. I'd also like to continue thanking the superintendent, our cabinet, our principals, all of our administrators, teachers, and staff. This has been an adjustment. It continues to be an adjustment, and we don't take any of that for granted. Last but certainly not least, our parents and guardians and students who are also on this journey with us. It sounds like overall things are going relatively smoothly, and we don't take that for granted either. A lot of work and a lot of time and energy, both on the part of the district, but also patience and understanding on the part of our parents, guardians, and students. So thanks everybody for that. All right, Dr. Rishi.
Thank you, Mr.
Superintendent's remarks.
Thank you, Mr. Feinberg. Exactly 6 weeks ago today, that was March 12th, our students left school anticipating a return to their classrooms and to their teachers that following Monday, March 16th. What a turbulent journey these past 6 weeks have been for everyone involved. The first 2 weeks since we've been out, we were introduced to social distancing. Healthcare workers prepared for increased cases of COVID-19, and schools were figuring out how to provide review and some practice experiences in a remote way for their students. As we rolled into the next 2 weeks, we then began to experience stay-at-home orders, essential businesses closed, unemployment began to rise, even within our own township. And Haverford Township was identified as second in the county with the number of confirmed COVID-19 cases. We then learned that our schools would not be opening the doors again for our students in the 2019-2020 school year. We began to undertake an examination into the ways in which we could provide new learning experiences for our students, ever mindful of the issues of access and equity, while remaining cognizant of the ever-changing needs and priorities that were emerging in households. Over these last 2 weeks, unemployment has continued to rise, stay-at-home orders remain in place, and the schools were informed that they must provide new learning experience and instruction at all levels, not just review and practice. What a journey this has been. We're journeying to a destination that cannot be fully described. We don't know exactly how to prepare or what the potential risks are or how to plan for those unknown risks. But we do know one thing. We know that the destination is not the only goal. The experiences and the discoveries along the way will enhance what we do and serve as a guide down the road. We know that flexibility and a willingness to explore are requirements for anyone on this journey. While en route, we may discover a better way to approach the trip, and we will make those modifications to provide for a richer, deeper learning experience for our traveling companions, our students. We owe them nothing less. And we are explorers who are planning for the longer term, should we find ourselves in a position where we need to make a return visit. I want to thank everyone who's been involved. As Mr. Feinberg, you actually used the word journey and talked about the experiences from students to teachers to parents to care providers. There have been so many people involved in helping us through this journey and continuing to help us move it forward and being understanding. We want to continuously improve and make these experiences rich for our students. So as we learn better ways to do that, we promise our students that we will. There was an email that was sent out to parents and a few things that I just want to highlight. Families understandably may find themselves in need of additional resources. We have contact information for our social workers within that email. We talk about live interactions with teachers. There's an additional link to information specifically for parents of elementary children in that email. We talk about gathering belongings. We know there are a lot of personal belongings in the buildings, and we're working on a process that sometime after May 8th, we hope to be able to have that process in place. Reimbursement for trips paid, or students talked about plans that were made for events that would be occurring throughout the remainder of the year. Well, the trips such as a camping trip, a Hershey Park trip that we know are not going to occur, we're designing a process for reimbursement for those funds that were paid. We're still looking forward and planning ahead and for registration and focusing on our kindergarten registration right now. So there's information there about that. And also our end of the year planning and how that's being approached at the different levels. This week, I had the opportunity to meet with the Ed Foundation via a Zoom meeting. I'm looking forward next week to meeting with IDC. And there are some opportunities to come up for the principals and I to meet with PTO representatives. We're getting that together. So we'll be well versed in all of our Zoom meetings relatively soon. At our last board meeting, my 3 colleagues from Curriculum, Learning and Assessment, and Pupil Services provided an overview of what their offices have been working on during the closure. And I asked this evening if Mr. Parker, our HR director, would provide an overview of what his office has been working on during that period of time. So I'm going to turn that over to him just for a brief update as part of my remarks. Thank you.
Thank you. And I did hear the brief, so I understand that's my charge. Generally, generally, I'm happy to take a moment to report that the HR department is largely carrying on our routine functions, of course, primarily remotely, with each of our team coming into the office alone for the most part, rotating as necessary to access certain materials and data that is in the office. We are, in that respect, in those routine respects, we're keeping up with our ASOP, our absence management system program, and our unemployment comp reporting, processing various routine benefit changes. And I want to stop a moment and just thank the technology department for really strong efforts that were made at the start of this time to allow us to complete most of our work remotely. They really, Sarah Christensen, Rob Anderson, and I won't try to name the whole team because I'll leave somebody out, but I just want to thank them for their efforts in getting us all set up at our various locations to allow us to do this. Of course, that's some of the routine matters that we're keeping up with, but all is not routine currently. I don't have to tell anyone. As a result of the passage of Pennsylvania's Act 13, and in addition, the Federal Government CARES Act, we have been, I'm going to say, inundated with questions and requests, and sometimes suggestions arriving in the HR office in a variety of modes. And of course, we need to analyze and research and respond to what are many times now new issues and new circumstances that neither the staff members nor the district have really seen before, and for which there are not necessarily quick, clear answers. So, and these questions many times are around the issues of leaves, new leaves that may have been provided in the Federal Act, and of course pay. And so we are addressing these as promptly as we can. We're asking for patience, and we're generally getting that. So I think everybody knows we're in a situation where new circumstances and new laws are providing challenges for all of us. We are, in fact, right now needing to contact and assist employees with clearances that are expiring this year. Of course, that's always the case. That's something that we're always up against. But while the state recognizes right now that we have, at this time, this unfortunate time, we have hit the 5-year mark for the first threshold of 5-year renewal period. No waivers have been issued. So we're having to remind folks that I know we're in unusual circumstances, but we have no waivers, and we need to continue to remind you and press you and assist you to get your clearances taken care of. And we don't expect that there are going to be waivers issued, even though many of the fingerprinting locations are not up and running. Some are, but not as many as we usually have. So that's a challenge right now. And it's a challenge for our staff, because we're asking people to take on something that might, under normal circumstances, is routine, but right now, nothing's routine. On a real positive side, and again with a nod to the technology department who has made it possible for us, we are continuing to work remotely with Tyler Technology, our vendor, and making progress on the new interactive employee benefits portal. We are pressing ahead with our plans to implement online open enrollment starting on May 7th, right around the corner. And I have to give some credit, to one of our staff in HR, Dawn DeTomo, who is just working so hard on this, while, I hope she won't mind me saying this, while just this week becoming a grandmother for the first time. So she's had a nice piece of positive news, but she's continuing to work very hard on this this project, and we are hoping to, we are going to implement this on May 7th for a 3-week open enrollment this year, interactive. So that will be some work. We expect that we'll have some challenges as we press forward with that, but we're going to do it. And we're getting a lot of help from technology and a lot of help from the business office also. And then again, on the more routine front, we are continuing, as we normally would this time of year, on planning for our staffing and recruitment for 2021. In what I would say, and I know you know this, we're in as dynamic an environment as I think we've likely ever experienced at the district and around the state and beyond. So right now, that's a bit of a moving target, but it will happen. We'll succeed, and we'll hit the target. So the entire district has some work to do in that respect, but we're poised to complete that task. Some concrete evidence of our intent to succeed is that some of our administrators are in fact conducting first-round interviews this week, obviously online, remotely, for certain administrative positions, and so we're nearly at the end of the first round of that process, and we'll be repeating that for some other positions and responding as we need to the changes. Personally, I've been attending more Zoom meetings and webinars than I can count with both authorities around the state and more, I think, more usefully with HR directors in our own Delco group, Delaware County group, and the Montgomery County group also. I tend to participate in both, and just trying to stay fully informed on what is a changing and challenging landscape in the HR field. So thank you for your time. I won't go on at length. If there are any questions, I'd be happy to try to address them. Thank you.
Thanks, Greg, and thanks to the staff in your office as well. Mr. Feinberg, that concludes my superintendent remarks for this evening. I don't want to cut anyone off if they do have questions, but I just wanted to let you know that I don't have anybody else I'm going to ask to talk tonight.
Thank you very much. Any questions from the board at this point? Okay, hearing none.
Hi. Could Mr. Parker remind everybody just the scope of the district's employment, how many employees we have?
We have, in addition to 440 professional employees, we have a total, including that group, of about 975 full and part-time employees. So approaching 1,000 employees here at the district.
Any other questions from the board?
Yes. This may seem a little insensitive, but I would just like to know if we would get, some of our money refunded. For example, I was on Gold Team and we were supposed to go on a camp trip at the end of the year, but obviously that's canceled. I would just like to know if we would get our money back.
Sure. Yep, and this is Dr. Rucci, not an insensitive question at all, a very appropriate question to ask. We know that there are trips like the Camp Canadensis trip, the Hershey Park trip, and there's actually quite a few of them, Hannah, around the district. So our business office is putting together a process that can be communicated to the building principals so that we can get all the information that we need to get, and that refund can be issued to each of the families or whoever made that payment. Good question.
Thank you.
Any other questions? Next item on our agenda is a construction project update. We'll have Mr. Ken Matthews from CB Development. Ken, how are you this evening?
Hello. Good evening. Thank you for having me as always. You can hear me clearly, I hope. So tonight, let's give a brief update on the high school, stop and answer any questions, and then we'll move along to the Linwood project. So right now, even though construction, as you know, in a lot of places has stopped, the good news is for the high school, designs continued. Our architect and engineers have continued working. They were on site this week doing a very detailed survey of the building now that the design is far enough along to make sure the comments they're putting on the drawings and whatnot, because we're doing a renovation as well as the additions. We are, as you know, we were going through the planning process with the township. They, sorry, starting my video. I spoke to the township today and they were hopeful that the planning board will be doing some Zoom type meetings. So I would think most likely in May, we'll be able to get back in front of the planning board and complete the land development process. Even if it goes into June, that's fine. That doesn't affect anything as far as the project schedule. Over the past week, we received the updated cost estimate for the project. We just received it earlier this week. So we're going through that with KCBA, and then we'll really get into the weeds, so to speak, make sure the scope is fully covered, that's been reviewed, and then go through the budget in a lot more detail with the administrative staff as we continue on, the designers moving into construction documents, which are still remain on schedule to be done by August, so we can bid the project this fall. So really, overall, the high school is continued as it normally would. So that's the update as far as the high school is concerned. If anybody has any questions. Okay, that being said, we'll move along into Linwood. So as everybody knows, there's Linwood right behind me. Work stopped as of March 20th. And, you know, the governor's office did allow work to restart depending on as each district worked with their contractors. So we've been working with the contractors over the past weeks. Stubner, as you know, is the general contractor of the site, so they're responsible for the site. And just this week, after a lot of back and forth, a lot of conversations, looking at what other districts have been doing, they've submitted a plan. They've engaged environmental control systems. That is also the district's environmental consultant for asbestos abatement, those type of things, to assist them with putting together a plan. They've put together a 28-page document that, you know, has, I'm sure all of you have seen the numerous CDC regulations, OSHA, all those type of sites, all the recommendations. But what we asked them to do is provide a plan that's specific to the Linwood project. How are they going to specifically deal with where they are in construction and how work will continue? So I just wanted to briefly highlight a few items, and then if anybody has any questions, we can talk about that. But basically, so environmental ECS is going to have a hygienist on site that will be, as the workers come on in the morning, they will be taking their temperature. They'll be asking them a handful of questions. You know, have you been around people, those type of things with COVID-19. And then that will be the way to enter the site. They'll funnel everybody through the rear parking lot, which is at 7 o'clock in the morning, so it's long before school starts. And then they'll have toolbox talks, which are a typical safety talk that's done, but they'll be more specific to COVID-19. They'll have things like setting up hand wash stations. They'll have a spray bottle at porta-johns to spray it down after they're used. Initially, they'll be using the existing bathroom in the basement of Linwood that's right next to our construction trailer until some of these other measures, putting sinks out on site with running water, can be done. So it seems like, you know, from what we can read through here, it's quite detailed. They have a lot of things covered. So one of the things I did want to mention, you know, work hasn't started here, but a number of your neighbors have started work. Springfield started their high school project about 10 days ago. Stubner's the general contractor for that. Stubner's also working in Downingtown. I believe it's the Euclid Elementary School. That work started about 2 weeks ago as well. I know Westchester had started some renovation work almost immediately back at late March. And I know there's been other districts in the area from Upper Dublin to the Allentown that are starting work as of last week and this week. So they are implementing different protocols, we've heard, at different places. Some districts have hired the hygienist directly. Here, everything is really funneling through Stubner as the general contractor, as they're the ones that are responsible for the site contractually. And then we're trying to get the buy-in of the other prime contractors, JBM and Westcott, so that they kind of agree to this overall plan, have any input that they feel, so that everybody's comfortable to go back to work. I'm sure as you all saw, the governor just issued a few days ago, it was construction would start May 8th. And then today it was announced that looking to allow construction to start May 1st. The guidelines associated with that have not been issued unless they were issued this evening, but they're imminently to be issued. So we'll see what that has to say, which May 1st, it's hard to believe, is next Friday. So Stubner was looking to hopefully start work in the next week. JBM and Westcott, the two other prime contractors, have not given an exact start date when they'd like to return. But based on conversations, it sounds like within the next 2 weeks, they would be willing to start back up on site. And it would not be full-on forces, everybody. There would be, we're hearing anywhere from 60 to maybe 70% of the workforce until they get a sense of how this goes forward, how the work can proceed. Certainly there's a lot of other details of schedule, et cetera, to go through as we get back to work. The good news for Linwood, a lot of the major work to go on is the exterior facade of the building. So the workers are outside. A mason, for example, can be, social distancing is fairly easily accomplished. So it seems, to be a good plan, and they would like to get back to work, I think, as everybody else would like to get back to work. So if anybody has any questions, please feel free.
And who's going to absorb the costs for the extra measures that are being taken?
The extra measures, that would be part of a claim that they would submit to the school district, because this is almost a force majeure is the word you've heard a lot. This is something that has occurred, and it's being forced upon them. That's completely out of their control, and contractually, those costs would come back to the district. The very difficult part is, to your question, is what are they going to be? And to be frank, I don't think anybody knows exactly right now. You can read a lot of different theories out there about workers are going to be 10 to 15% less efficient. So I don't know that we're going to be able to come up with a figure, but for example, the hygienist that's going to be on site daily, those are the type of costs that would be known. We're going to work with Stubner to go through those costs, gather them, and make sure we track them very closely, and work with them as best as possible, and really dive in to help them figure out how best to work efficiently, so that there isn't a lot of time lost.
Are we doing a cost comparison to see do we even have an option in this case? Do we have to open the site back up again? What if it becomes cost prohibitive to the district?
Well, let me think about that for a second. It's really, I don't know that it's going to become completely cost prohibitive just from an initial gut reaction. You're really talking about cleaning supplies. So you have a lot more of that. You have more porta-john cleanings that are going to have to be done. We can certainly come up with some general orders of magnitude. So at this point, Kristen, it's going to be very difficult to say exactly, but we can evaluate it and give a better update as we move along and as work gets started. But the hard part is, the contractors aren't going to sit there and say right now, well, this is, $200,000, because I don't think know exactly what it's going to be. So it's a difficult one to judge, but we can think about it a little more and be a little bit better prepared to give you an answer.
In our conversations, Ken, there are some numbers that are known, so we can at least start to, we would
Yes.
put that together, and keep the board informed that way.
I mean, just a quick example from some things that are out there. If a typical construction project, a 12-month project, they're saying could take 13 to 14 months. So if that's the case, it could be anywhere from a 5 to 15% premium on the labor hours. All the materials are what they are. So, this project is about 30%, a little more than 30% invoice to date. So they do have a lot of big work completed in place. So it's really going to be the man hours and then those additional cleaning costs, those type of things.
Is there any chance that our insurance would cover any part of these excess costs?
We'd have to talk and see your builder's risk plan. That's going to be one the insurance industry, I'm sure, is going to be challenged with, but we can review that with them and see if there is any chance of that at all. We have not gotten into that quite yet.
And Ken, just one final question. Do we have reassurances from Stubner that they have the employees to bring back? I'm just wondering, with the wages that construction workers earn, are they earning more on unemployment? And if the risk of going back to work is great, could it be difficult to attract workers back to the site?
So yes, that's a great question. That is certainly a concern right now. They've been finding that about anywhere from 60% to 70% of the workers are returning. Some are choosing not to yet, if they, maybe have a pre-existing condition or are just still, scared to return. So it's somewhere in that area. The good news is, from a mechanical, electrical, plumbing standpoint, we don't have a lot of tradesmen. There's maybe 4 electricians on site and maybe a total of 8 to 10 mechanics and plumbers. So those aren't huge numbers. Stubner, the Masons, they have 8 to 10 men. So luckily it's not, you don't have a project, I was at the airport where you had 125 carpenters on the job. That could have a drastic effect on it. So although it might be slightly less for now, and I think as workers come back, it's going to be like anything else. They're going to get used to it. It's a new way of life. You have to wear a mask. You have to, wear gloves. And as they get used to it and see, hey, this is okay, I need to get back to work, hopefully those numbers increase.
Thank you.
I had a question.
And were there any challenges with securing the site, and do you anticipate any challenges in remobilizing activity there? And are there additional costs from that closure and reopening?
Yeah, so I mean, the costs are minimal. I mean, the workers spent a day gathering tools and taking it off site. So you're talking a few man days of time to bring some things back. There still is equipment on site. A lot of them, took all their personal tools, those type of things. So that's not a huge cost. The site's been secure. We've been checking on it. Nothing's been stolen or vandalized to date. So that hasn't been an issue. There was a fox in the building, but that's about, let's hope that's the only excitement so far. So I, certainly I've already heard of projects in the city that have had a lot of issues with theft, but knock on wood, we have not had that here.
Ken, I just had a question. You indicated, I believe, if I'm not mistaken, that a couple other districts have started their projects last week.
Yeah, Springfield was 10 days ago.
Okay.
Downingtown, I think, was about the same, maybe a little bit earlier. Westchester started renovation actually right at the end of March, or got back to doing the renovation. So yes,
Okay.
Other districts have started.
And they all have, I'm assuming, similar safety plans as to what we developed. Is there any sense, I mean, or do you know, or could you, kind of ask how those have worked out so far? If there have been any issues, been any complications, or anything else that'd be helpful to.
Sure. So I spoke to the owner of Stubner today some, and the Downingtown project has about 50 to 60 men on it. So, it's a decent sized workforce. That's about where we were at. Hasn't had any issues to speak of, again, it's just a little more routine. And folks staying, getting used to keeping their distance, just following those things, not sharing tools as much, wiping things down constantly. They have a number of hand stations all throughout that building. And then in Springfield, the same thing. He hasn't spoken of any real issues.
Okay. Just
go ahead.
No, I'm sorry. Just because I believe Kristen asked if there had been any issues, or could there be issues of absences or people not showing up. But so far, I guess from what you just said, there have not been any of those experiences so far. It's gone pretty smoothly, it sounds like. Is that accurate?
But you haven't had quite as many show back up. Not everybody has come back, but they haven't had any, real issues to speak of. So,
great.
The unemployment has certainly, I'm sure, kept some people home, but I know a lot of them have spoken about they want to get back to work.
All right, thanks.
Any other questions from the board?
Yeah, I have a question that goes along with that. To the extent that we, or you can keep in touch with Stubner on those projects, I mean, can they then give us an estimate from those projects? If there have been renovations or construction projects that have been happening for weeks now, what have the costs been like for them? Back to Kristen's original question on what the costs are going to be for us. Is it possible to get estimates from them as well? And if so, could you report back on those?
Yes, absolutely.
Thanks.
Any other questions from the board? Well, thank you, Ken. We'll look forward to things getting back, and seeing that building continue.
Yes, great. Thank you so much.
Thanks, Ken.
Take care.
Our next agenda item is an overview of the parent guardian survey.
And that's Jen Saxa, Mr. Feinberg.
Okay, Jen?
Good evening. Thank you, Mr. Feinberg. It's my pleasure to share the results tonight of our parent guardian feedback survey regarding our flexible learning plan. I'm sorry, I just can't see if the presentation is visible. Oh, there we go. Okay, now I can see. Terrific. Thanks. We can go on to the next slide now. Great. As you all know, Governor Wolf called for the closure of our schools beginning on March 16th of this year. After approximately 2 weeks of review and practice, our students and staff transitioned to the new learning phase of our flexible learning plan. Once the plan was in place for about 10 days, we sent a feedback survey to educators as well as one to parents and guardians. The survey was designed to provide us with information regarding how much work the students were getting, whether that work was appropriately challenging, and if we were communicating sufficiently. We also sought input regarding what is working, what should be changed, and what any other information that respondents wanted to share. We can head on to the next slide. Thanks. We were thrilled to receive over 3,100 responses, and we engaged in a specific process to analyze the results. We graphed the quantitative or the numbered-based data by school, subject, and grade. We then used a protocol similar to the one that we used for our strategic planning process in order to analyze the qualitative or open-ended data. This included dividing the responses among our administrators by building and department. Each person read the comments in order to discover trends or categories. They then began coding or labeling the responses as falling into one of those categories. Once they were finished, they went back to the beginning to sort of check their codes and their categories and make sure that everything still held true. Each administrator then brought these identified categories and some proposed solutions to a meeting where each set of responses was discussed. From this analysis, we were able to identify areas that we wanted to retain, as well as those that would benefit from some change. Principals shared these categories with staff, and modifications were made to our flexible learning plans. Tonight, we will review this data with the board, and beginning tomorrow, our principals will start to have conversations with teachers, and they will together pull apart specific data that pertains to their subject, grade, and department in order to continue the refinement of those practices as well. Now to the data. As you can see here, we had responses from each of our 7 schools. We also allowed responses that represented multiple children and/or multiple schools, allowing parents and guardians to choose whether they wanted to complete one survey per child or one survey for the whole family. Here, you can see that we received responses from each grade level as well. For our first question, we asked parents and guardians to rate their response to the following question on a scale of 1 to 5. How is flexible learning working for your family? 1 was labeled as it's really, really hard. And 5 was labeled as great. As you can see, a majority of our respondents, about 56%, responded with a 4 or a 5. About 30% responded with a neutral answer, and 14% responded with a 2 or a 1. We were pleased to see that approximately 85% of respondents were neutral or positive. Of course, we were also eager to dig more deeply to find out what wasn't working well for those who chose the 1 or the 2, in addition to learning what was working for those who chose a 4 or a 5. Here you can see the breakdown of that same question by building. So the dark blue on the right are the responses labeled 5 or great. The gold responses are 4 responses, people who selected the number 4, and so on. So if you look down the graph, you'll notice that the schools displayed about the same proportion of each response as the overall data show. So there were no great outliers with these schools where there was a much larger number or a much larger percentage responding differently in any one particular school. Interestingly, the same thing proved to be true when we broke this question down by grade level as well. So while there were some grades where we saw slightly more 3s or 2s, generally, all the grades show the same levels of satisfaction as was represented in the overall rating. Next, we probed about the amount of work per subject. The goal on this chart would be to have as much red as possible, as the red represents the response, quote, the right amount of work for this subject. Blue is too much work, and gold is not enough work. Green means not applicable. So obviously we have more not applicable responses for world language and for our specials and unified arts, as they are not offered at all levels at the same intervals. So we were quite pleased to see these levels of red on this graph, but we also wanted to see how it broke down according to grade as well. Here you can see responses for math by grade and English language arts by grade. You'll notice that there are more blue or NA, not applicable, responses at the high school level, since block scheduling means that not all students are taking these subjects this semester. And again, you'll notice the proportion of the responses is similar to the overall. There are a couple of grades that have slightly higher too much work responses, but most have just right as the overwhelming majority of responses, as you can see indicated by the gray in this graph. Here we have the same analysis for science and social studies by grade. The goal on this graph is to have as much gold in color as possible, and that is the case for most grades. One item to note is that we do rotate between science and social studies at the elementary level, so you'll see that again there are more not applicable responses for those subjects in grades K through 5. And here are the same graphs for world language and specials or unified arts by grade. Specials at the elementary level include art, music, physical education, and library. And at the middle and high schools, there are those subjects in addition to family and consumer science, technology, business, and more. Again, with the exception of the not applicable responses, most grades have about the same amount of gold in their graphs, noting a just right response for the amount of work. The next major question posed was the same, but this time we were asking people to rate the level of challenge that the work was presenting for students. Again, red is the just right answer, and we see that it is the one that was chosen by the vast majority of respondents. We've broken this level of challenge question down also by grade within a subject. Here we have the math and English language arts again. There are a few grades, mostly in the middle school, where a number of respondents selecting too challenging for this subject is greater than in other grades. This is just the sort of actionable feedback that we want and needed in order to adjust our practices. I do want to note, though, that we're always open to this kind of feedback, not only in the context of a survey. So if anyone is finding that there is too much work or that the work is too challenging, we encourage you to reach out to the appropriate teacher, counselor, or principal for support. And here are the social studies and science level of challenge by grade. Again, lots of gold, this time with a few grades in the high school seeing more challenge in social studies. The orange in this graph is the not applicable, so again, you'll see more of that at the high school and the elementary levels for these particular subjects. And here are the final challenge numbers for world language and unified arts. The last rating scale question we asked was regarding communication. Again, red is the right amount of communication. These responses were echoed actually in the open-ended responses as well, where many commented on the fact that they got clear communication and quick responses from their teachers and administrators. Here is that same question broken down by grade within a subject. As you can see, lots and lots of gold here. Next, we have science, social studies, the same information. And then finally, our unified arts and specials with our world language communication. The next question was an open-ended one, and we asked respondents to write about how flexible learning was going for their families. The responses that you see here are not in any priority order, but flexibility, as what's noted in that first bullet there, was one of the most frequently mentioned aspects of the work. Other elements that are working for families, as you'll see in these excerpts here, are the communication from teachers. Recorded instructional videos were mentioned many times as being beneficial, and using organizational tools like how the work was laid out for students to accomplish, or even organizational tools that families used at home to keep the students on a schedule that made sense. The next question was what one change would be most helpful? Again, this list is not in priority order, but these comments, like the others, are pulled from responses at all levels and from families of students of all kinds and all types of students. This obviously is the elementary, middle, and high school, as well as general ed, regular, special ed, English learners. All of our students were able to respond, families were able to respond to this survey. A top suggestion in this category was to find ways that students can see and hear their teachers more often. Interestingly, our teacher survey showed that the respondents there also listed this as a priority. There were also requests specifically for live synchronous teaching, which is where everybody would tune in to the same thing at the same time for live instruction. And then you'll see actually on the next set of comments that we also had many requests that we do not use synchronized learning, as they people at home were unable to coordinate sometimes the needs of multiple children for several reasons, including access to technology or limited adult support available at home. Another suggestion was to centralize our platforms that we use to post the lessons and collect the work from students. And when we get to our modifications slide, you'll note that we've begun to implement many of these suggestions. When asked if there was anything else that they would like to share, respondents did make sure to write sentiments like the ones that you see here. Again, not in priority order, but the number of simple thank yous was really notable. Many of those who responded also expressed appreciation for all of the effort that's being made. At the same time, some took this opportunity to note just how hard it is for their children to be away from school, to be away from their peers and their teachers. And many also noted just the challenges that we're all facing in this unprecedented time and wished us good health and to stay well. So, taking into account all of these responses, the responses from our educator survey, our own philosophy of continuous improvement, our focus on equity and relationships, and our desire to meet the needs of all of our students, we made several modifications to our flexible learning plans. Families were informed of these shifts in district communication that was sent last week. Beginning on Monday, all of our K-8 classrooms will be using Google Classroom as their communication hub. This learning management system has more capabilities than a regular website does. And the good news is it can be and will be used in conjunction with some other apps like Seesaw and Flipgrid that teachers and families were already using and found to be successful. At the high school level, classes will either be hosted in Canvas or Google Classroom. Parents also commented on the desire to organize the week's work before that Monday morning posting of assignments. So we shifted our time frame for posting them from Monday morning all the way back to the Friday before the week is, the Friday before the work is to be done. That way students and families will have a chance to sort of get organized over the weekend, think of what questions they may have, and then pose those questions to teachers on Monday morning when they will be able to begin responding to those. Likewise, we also extended the span of time that students had to complete the work into the following weekend, so we won't collect the work now until Monday. This doesn't mean that you can't turn something in earlier, it just means that we understand if you need to divide your time differently at home and can't actually turn it in until later. Our teachers have increased their use of instructional videos, and we have begun live open office hours, as we heard, at the secondary level. Information and permission slips for live interactions at the elementary level will be sent home this coming Monday. We're excited for students at every level to get to interact via video conferencing with their teachers and some of their fellow students. Additionally, we published grading guidelines outlining a pass-fail approach to fourth quarter at the high school and a feedback-only approach to progress reporting in kindergarten through 8th grade, where there will be no grades given. We also published attendance guidelines using participation and communication as our parameters for being marked present. And finally, while we're pleased that about 85% of respondents did give a neutral or better rating to their experience thus far, we're ever mindful of the 15 or 14% who reported that improvement was needed. In addition to making the modifications that I've discussed here for all students, our instructional assistants are also now supporting students and families in addition to what the teachers, counselors, and principals had been doing already. Also, just as it happens when we are attending school inside our buildings, our English learner teachers and special education teachers are following their students, making frequent contact with families, and collaborating with teachers to support accommodations in order to help all of our students thrive. As Dr. Rushi has noted in her letter home last week, we remain committed to a continuous improvement philosophy. This includes planning, doing, acting, and then checking. This is a cycle that encourages us to examine our practice and adjust as necessary. On that note, I would like to just publicly recognize, as we have heard several times this evening, our students and families who have had to make incredible adjustments to manage student schedules and support learning in a whole new way. Additionally, I can tell you our educators are working non-stop to maintain connections with children, make learning manageable and meaningful, and for themselves to learn a whole multitude of new skills so that they can provide the best education possible for our students. I recognize that everybody's doing this with the same kinds of activities and challenges in their home environment. And I just wanted to express my gratitude to the Haverford community, our administrators, our educators, and of course to the board for their continued support.
Thanks, Jen. Questions from the board?
Yeah, I have a question. This is Antoinette. I think I totally agree. I think that surveys like this are really helpful. Is there a plan to do this on any sort of ongoing basis? Because now that, you know, obviously we know that we won't be having school. Oh, I lost myself. We won't be having school for the rest of the year in person. And so just wanted to know if this is, every couple weeks we're going to get something like this, just to check in with folks, or if that's a possibility.
So we have talked about when a survey on this scale would be necessary again. And I believe that might be really helpful to have at the conclusion to sort of look back and see, okay, what might we want to continue if this kind of schooling would need to continue forward beyond this school year. But that is not to say that we are not going to be seeking feedback. That's something that is going to be happening and continues to happen and is already happening at the teacher level, as well as the building level. And to be honest, that is where the information is needed most, because that's where there's like an immediate turnaround that can be personalized for the student or the group of students. So it's funny, I got a message from a parent earlier this week that said, I'll tell you one thing, my kids are learning to be advocates. This is a parent of a high school student. They keep asking me and I don't know the answer. So I said, go ask your teacher, and they do. And so now they're learning to do that, more regularly than they might have normally. And so really that sort of on the ground kind of feedback, I think, will be most integral in these next several weeks. But certainly, I love a good survey. So if we are going to continue forward, I'm always happy to ask for feedback and input.
Okay, thanks.
Sure.
Bridget?
Hi, I'm wondering if you could provide some context about the grading decision. I saw that, it was communicated, but I'm just kind of curious about the thinking, especially in the high school, and kind of the option to go pass-fail versus the standard grade.
Sure. This is one of the questions that we pondered a little bit longer than some of the other questions. And ultimately, our decision came down to some of the research that we read specific to this actual crisis that we're in right now. There were a couple of factors that are impacting student performance that are beyond student control. Not the least of which is the level of stress that all students are feeling, that, even if this pandemic were occurring and we were in school, we would still see students' grades maybe not be as good as they normally would be just because of what we're dealing with the pandemic. Also, students do not have the same level of control over their home environment, and we can't control that either. Whereas we can control the school environment. So there's another item where students who are typically high performing or are typically independent students were predicted to do poorly or not as well in their grades. And then there is also an equity piece that not everybody has the devices at home, not everybody has the family support at home, and the fact that a letter grade of a B in this environment is not really equal to a letter grade of B in first quarter from this year, because what you would had to do, learn, cope with is not the same as what you would have needed then. So Mr. Donaghy has been working really hard with his team to come up with the right balance of using pass-fail to then calculate still an overall grade, make sure that we're not going to negatively impact third quarter grades, make sure that it's not going to have a negative impact on class rank. Not that we actually publish class rank, but sometimes colleges need it. No salutatorian, none of that will be impacted in a way that would change an outcome for families because of the pass-fail. It's also something that almost all of the other area school districts are doing at the high school level.
Thank you.
Sure.
Laura?
Hi, I had a couple of questions related to technology. So my first question was, have we solved the technology problem? Does everybody have access to what they need in order to be successful at this point?
So I will let Sarah jump in here. I'll just say that we know that families who requested and needed a device to have one device in their home do have that. But if you have multiple children You do not necessarily have a device for every child. Ms. Christensen, do you want to jump in on that?
Sure. It's a great question, because when we hear about access, sometimes we just think about, oh, I thought we were distributing technology, and we have, and we are. And those, we are actually doing secured home deliveries at the moment. So we are bringing devices to families and also to staff when needs arise. So that is currently continuing to happen. We also have started providing Wi-Fi. Our hotspots are in. Mr. Anderson was able to secure hotspots, and they are in, and technology team members are bringing those to people's houses. But to Jen's point, we are very cognizant that, you know, if you have 5 students in your household, the demands on those devices are going to vary. So that's what we're referring to when we say access to supervision adults, but then also to technology. So things are going to change, circumstances are going to change. Mr. Feinberg talked about the unemployment rate, so we are ever cognizant about that. So to say we have solved, or we are at a place of, you know, everybody has what they need, I don't think throughout this we will ever be able to say that everybody, we've answered the, you know, we've come up with the solution and everybody has what they need. It's going to be a continual process that we're committed to providing to, but it's an ongoing process for sure.
Great, thank you. My other question was sort of related to that, but more about curriculum, especially at the younger levels. Probably a question for Jen, I guess. Are we relying heavily on videos and online content, or are we, I know especially at the younger ages, they do more like worksheets and crafts and things like that. How has that curriculum changed?
So thank you for asking that question. It is definitely something that remains sort of top of mind for all of our teachers. So from the beginning, when the very first closure that we had, we talked about the need to vary assignments. We don't want anyone to have to spend their entire time sitting in front of a computer. So we want everyone to be able to go outside, collect some leaves, and talk about like what you see there, or you know, have different experiences. By the same token, we have increased recently, and we will continue to increase, the use of videos for the introduction of skills and concepts, for even just to review the directions, also to see everybody's face and hear an explanation. But we will continue to use everything from reading and writing and video in order to engage students.
Great, thank you so much.
And Jen, the videos that we are increasing in number are now, many of them created by our own teachers. So,
yes.
As reliant upon a commercial package.
Exactly. We listen, there are lots of really great resources out there, but the beauty of being able to use our own district teachers and our own district curriculum and resources is that we know it's what we intended as a school district for our students to learn. And our teachers are working together, particularly, well, at every level, but, you know, across grades at the elementary and then across departments at the secondary level, to really identify what are the key skills and concepts, and then, you know, find the best resource or make the best resource to help students learn that and engage with it in a meaningful way.
Any other questions from the board?
Actually had a question. Jen, how are we accounting for, I'm looking at, oh, I wish these slides were numbered. Let me see, 1, 2, 3. The 5th slide in, with the question, how is flexible learning working for your family? We have the responses there in the 1, 2, and 3 range, which come to about 43% of people being, I'm assuming those categories correspond with this is really hard, this is hard, and not sure, and neutral. So while the very positive responses still outweigh the less positive or neutral responses, it's still a significant number. So how are we making sense of that information and reaching out to and supporting the families who fall in the 1 and 2 range specifically, but also maybe in the 3 range?
Yeah, that was really helpful to get all of the information in one place. So we're able to take a look and see what are the comments associated with each of these levels. And we found that what came from those who were saying it wasn't working had to do with communication, had to do with it needs to all be in one place. We can't go 100 different places to find it. We need more video instruction. Please don't just send something home and expect my child to be able to do it. I need you to tell them how to do it. So there was a part of the survey that asked them, what is the change you need? And we are able to then address that change. And so, not to say that the 4s and 5s didn't also have suggestions. They did. That's why it was a question for everybody. But that's where we had that's the basis for the modifications that I described, is the choice of, those general trends that we are addressing through the modifications.
Okay. Thanks.
Mm-hmm.
Any other questions or comments from the board?
I guess one other question related to Antoinette's question about surveying families again. I know this is really time consuming to put out a survey, gather responses, and then to code and make sense of the data. But I do wonder if we wait until the end of the school year. I just know things are changing at the speed of light right now, day to day, week to week in families' individual situations. And we're also moving to, we're transitioning the means of learning. Is there a way for us to conduct another survey, maybe not on the same scale, but just to get a sense, like as in a midpoint between now and the end of the school year, where people are at?
Sure. I think that there's nothing wrong with asking the question. And, it doesn't, the time that it takes to analyze it is always helpful and a learning experience for us. So there's nothing wrong with that. I do remain mindful that we need to use the modifications. So we've made some modifications. We need to have, several weeks of that getting in place so people can establish a routine and they are not then just responding to the challenge that comes with change, with a modification. So we would want to see it be in place for a little while so that we could then ask, okay, now how is it working if we were to do that?
Mm-hmm. Thanks.
Okay, any other questions or comments from the board at this point? Well, thank you very much, Jen. We appreciate all the good work.
Thank you.
Nice job, Jen. Thank you.
Thank you.
Next item on our agenda is the proposed final budget, which we're entering interesting territory. Mr. Regal.
To say the least. Do we have the presentation? Okay. Just wanted to tell everyone that the budget process is one where there's 3 budgets. The first one is where it's a site-based budget and everyone puts their different departments put their budgets together and salaries and benefits are added and debt service. And then all of it's accumulated. And usually when you have that preliminary budget, it might have a little sticker shock in it because everybody's wants and needs are loaded into that. And then, but we approve that as a preliminary budget and usually expenditures exceed revenues. From that point on, we work to refine and reduce it down to the point where the expenditures match up with the revenues in April when we do the proposed final budget. And usually the proposed final budget is only a few refinements away from actually being the adopted budget in June. But I would have to say this year is not the case. So we were doing very well. We had probably about a 2.8% shortfall, expenditures over revenues in the preliminary budget. And we reduced probably $1.3 million out of that. And we were really looking good. Then the crisis came in, which affected our revenue, our interest earnings for the end of this fiscal year and for next year, and also transfer taxes, and probably will affect other revenue areas. So if we go into the budget, I can go over through the proposed final budget, which is the next step to adopting the final budget. So if you want to go to the next slide. Just as I showed before, go back one. Act 1 index was 2.6%. We did this budget has Act 1 with special ed exceptions at 3.22%. That was also to help put in the debt service for the projects that we had to be able to fit that into the budget. We were lucky enough on the medical and prescription that we ended up, our second look showed that we were a 0.5% reduction. We're in the Delaware County Medical Trust, and we're able to, because we have a trust fund balance in there, we were able to get pretty much a zero, actually a lower than zero increase in our medical. PSERS, our retirement employer rate, is 34.51%. So for every dollar we pay out in salary, 34% we have to pay also, of which we get half of that back in a subsidy from the state. We also have put into the budget a one-time expenditure right now for textbooks of $662,000. So if we go to the next slide, you'll see all the cost drivers that we have currently in the budget. And this is, salaries are 2.2%. The retirement net of the subsidy is $445,000. The books that we talked about, the one-time expenditure for textbooks, is $662,000, and debt service is $342,000. So our expenditures are up $3.7 million. The downside is that we're projecting interest loss of $730,000 compared to what we were normally getting, and transfer tax loss of $600,000. So we have a net cost on the revenue side because of loss of revenue of $1.3 million. Now that comes up to the total cost drivers of $5 million, which when we move to the next slide, those are the new positions we currently have in the budget, and we're considering whether to keep them or not. That's still part of the budgetary process, but they're still in there. Go to the next slide. As you can see, our revenues are at $127,459,000. Our expenditures are at $132,599,000. We have an $800,000 budgetary reserve. So the shortfall is $5,140,000, which is very close to the cost driver number that I showed you on the other page. So those are the reasons why we're short. If we had a zero increase in our taxes, that's how much we'd be short. Our revenues would be short of our expenditures. We're proposing in this budget a 3.22% increase in our taxes. That will bring in $3,169,000, and that still leaves us short almost $2 million. We're using fund balance for $1,308,000, and also for $662,000 for the one-time expenditure for textbooks. So we're just under $2 million short. We're still working on it. We have a list of reductions to go through, and to tell you the truth, the budget has a lot of, normally, like I said, in proposed final budget, you're pretty close, a few refinements away from the final budget. But in this case, there's a lot of moving parts, and the revenue losses that we're incurring could also affect our collection rate for real estate taxes, so there's some real things to ponder in this budget process. But currently, the proposed final budget shows a 3.22% increase, which for the average increase for the property owner is $174 on top of their current taxes.
Excuse me, Bob, there's a question outstanding. Do you want to hold questions to the end of the presentation, or would you like to take one now?
Can I wait, because it's a short, I do have some detailed slides if we needed them, but it's a short presentation. Okay. So let's go to the next slide. Okay, well, then that's all we have is adopting the proposed final budget this time. and then June 4th adopting the final budget. So whoever has a question, yeah.
Antoinette?
Yeah, sorry, I was muted. My question, can we go to slide 3? So we have, that's where it sort of lays out the interest losses, the transfer tax losses. So is this calculation new and based on the current environment? Is that why we're projecting these losses, or were these planned before that?
That's big. Go ahead, Bob.
I was just going to say that the interest rates, for instance, we were up at 2% or 1.8%, and the Federal Reserve dropped the at 140 basis points, so 1.4. So it went down to 0.4, and it's actually lower than that now. So we knocked the number down. Interest rates 730,000. So normally we would get $1.1 million in interest earnings. We're down at 370,000. Now that would probably have to be a 0.5% on the average investment. So I'm trying to be a little bit optimistic and not going all the way down to the rock bottom. But most of our money is collected in August for real estate taxes, and then that has to be invested to mature on payroll dates and bill list dates and debt service dates for big expenditures. So if normally you'd be getting that extra money in interest earnings, but I can't count on that between now and August, that how much the interest rates would recover from where they are now.
I think, Bob, if I'm interpreting Antoinette's question correctly, in previous presentations, Antoinette, you have not seen those numbers. So yeah, this is a change due to the current landscape.
Okay. Yeah, because I guess then my just general question was, obviously I think everyone appreciates how fluid the situation is. And, we really appreciate you looking at these probably more on an hour by hour basis than even a day-to-day basis, just because everything is constantly changing. But I just think it would be helpful for folks to know, how much in this proposed budget really accounts for the current state of the economy that we're in. And, I think, everyone expects that this is probably going to change because we're going to learn new information, but, just to get an idea of, what of the current economy has already been put into these numbers.
Okay.
Well,
we can do
interest and transfer tax losses, and also, but we haven't changed the collection rate for real estate, which averages around 97.2%. 1% adjustment down there would be another loss of about $980,000 in revenue. So that's I talked to the other business managers in the county, and these are the same type of questions they're wrestling with. What to do? How do you balance a budget that ends up with a huge hole in it on the revenue side? So.
Other questions or comments from the board?
Bob, is there a reason why we're not considering a hiring freeze, considering the state of these numbers and the new positions that we're looking to fill?
Kristen, that may be what we're coming back with. That is one way that we would be looking at reducing our dependency upon the fund balance, that we would look at not replacing for current vacancies that exist, in addition to those new positions that are identified on there. Now, I will say in some instances, those new positions may have to come to fruition because we do have class sizes that are high already. So in other districts, they may have the luxury of saying, one of the ways that we're going to address this is raise our class sizes and not hire the number of new teachers that we need. We have our classes, as we've got first grade classes that have 25 children in them. We would never go up to 30 children in those classrooms. So that I just want to caution, we wouldn't wipe the slate clean. We would probably also come back, Kristen, and say that the textbooks that are proposed there, they are new textbooks. And maybe we would look to say we're going to have to make do with what we have, for the upcoming year. So there are some things that will definitely look different when this budget comes back.
If you look at the salary number there, you see that's the difference between budget years, almost $2.3 million. Probably, half a million of that or so is from new positions, and the remainder is from increases with current increases by the current staff
Actual.
from one year to the next. So,
Bridget, you had your hand up?
Yes, I was going to ask, I know that just according to the schedule that school districts are required to follow, we need to prepare a budget before we get much guidance from the state on their budget. But given the economic environment, there are concerns about what that state budget will look like when they get around to passing it. Has any of that factored into our budget yet? I know we don't have as much reliance on state funding as some other districts, but what is your outlook there and the impact that we might feel?
well, we do have the state's budget numbers in there. I've been doing this for 30-some years, and I think the only other time the state fell short, this federal government stepped in. I don't know what'll happen in this time. I'm sure Larry remembers that. We had a lot of funding that was paid by the federal government. It was state money that they were borrowing, and then the state ended up paying it back. So that made us whole. So I don't know where this is going to go, but you got to kind of hope that some things will fall into place, and otherwise you'd be stripping down the expenditures just to make it work. So and we don't want to get to that point,
I probably should also add, I don't want our board members to think that the next time we're going to be discussing the budget will be in June when you would be asked to vote on it. I well imagine that our 2 meetings in May, there will be time dedicated to, where are we, what are we looking at in terms of the impact of the, current situation.
Laura, you have your hand up?
Yeah, I wanted to know more about the real estate situation. So I know the real estate market is sort of on hold right now. And I know that the governor has like this 3-wave plan for reopening. I wasn't sure if you, Bob, or if anyone had heard whether or not real estate was part of that, and if there would be a potential reopening of sort of the real estate markets, and that could potentially work in our favor. Have you heard anything about this?
All I know about that is that I know a few realtors, and they, they can't do closings, and they can't do, but I think behind closed doors they're doing virtual, things. And I think that, with the interest rates, I think there are people who do have secure jobs, I think, that are, if the interest rates are so low that they would, could jump into there. But the economy would have to come back, I think, to, I can't speculate on that. I know some people that had closures for late May, and they don't know whether it's going to happen or not, but they were scheduled for it. And they're waiting to see what happens. So, but for 2019-20, we were sitting pretty well. We had a surplus of 1.4 million when we first projected, and then we lost revenue at the tail end, but we did do well because, like I said, when we get our real estate revenue, which is a huge part of our, like $90 million of our budget, we invest it to go out and cover those biweekly payrolls. The the bills, the debt service, all those big expenditures. And at that time, the rates were from 1.8% to even in the twos, 2.2, I think was a range. So we did lock a lot of money in. So I wouldn't be surprised if we matched our budget, or our revised budget, let's put it that way, and be okay in 2019-20. Our transfer tax was doing really well, and then it just stopped. So our budget's like 1.8, and I think we brought in about 1.2 so far. So we're going to lose 600,000 there. But like I said, we had a projected revenues over expenditures of 1.4. So that's not going to happen. We'll get closer to breaking even in 19-20, our revenues compared to our expenditures. So that's a good thing, that our we did forgo a lot of expenditures. They don't have the big numbers, but they do add it, closing down all the buildings and shutting down the boilers, and it's saving on electricity and so forth. And then the buses, they're all parked, they're all fully tapped off with their fuel, and our tanks are filled, but no place to go. So we do have a lot of areas where we're not making expenditures. So we're also making a lot of expenditures on the crisis.
Yes, I was going to just caution you there, Bob, that maybe at a future meeting we can talk about like what those numbers are, because I don't want people to think that we've got a lot of.
We don't. It's not like we have a lot of money to burn. It's just a different way of existing right now. So
yeah, but at a future meeting, you can look at what are the savings. You've already started that. You reviewed some of that with the finance folks. What are the things that we are saving, but what are the expenditures that we are incurring that we would not have if we were not in this situation? And we can incorporate that into another presentation.
There are other questions or comments from the board?
On the expenditure side, I know in Philadelphia, Superintendent Height mentioned today that when schools open in September, there's a good chance that students will be required to wear masks. And, that could also be a possibility here as well, depending on where we are in the governor's reopening plan. Has there been any talk or consideration around who would be providing those masks to our students if indeed they are wearing them when they come back to school?
Well, right now, the facilities department is providing the ones to, like my employees in the business office are coming in. They're segregating and working because you can't do all the payroll and you can't do all the accounts payable stuff from home. So there are contracts to be signed. So we do have to come in at times. So we do have masks. We do have.
But to answer Kristen's question, that question has come up with superintendents, asking if we can get some clarification, like any kind of guidance on that. There's no answer to it as of yet. There's also concern about the availability of them if everyone, is ordering them.
Of course.
The IU has bid procurement on a lot of things. I wouldn't be surprised if they got involved and purchased those things for all the districts in the county, but I don't know.
Okay.
Other questions from the board? I'd like to make some comments. Having been around for the 2009 through 2011 recession and the impact that it had on districts, the impact on the economy of what we're going through right now really can't be overstated. The fact that people aren't working and aren't spending money at the state level, the state is going to be looking at a dramatically lower revenue because personal income tax, sales tax, you're just not going to have the kind of numbers that we're accustomed to. One of the more significant items is that last week the House Majority Leader introduced an amendment that would have prohibited school districts from increasing their property taxes next year. And the amendment, he couldn't summon enough votes to bring it to the floor, but it's a real possibility that that's going to come back around. If you throw in the fact that it's an election year, that the political dynamics there, it's going to be harder. Those kind of votes are going to be harder. And I think we've already had some preliminary discussions with Dr. Rushi and Mr. Regal that, there's a possibility that we may be faced with a zero increase budget. Back in the 2009, 2011 scenario, over 27,000 teachers and school personnel lost their jobs statewide. So this is we're not in great territory here. Kristen mentioned the face masks that came out of the superintendent's office in Philadelphia today. The other thing that came out of their board meeting is that although for the first time in a long time, they're in pretty good shape financially, they're now projecting that they may be looking at $1 billion deficit, going out a year or two. If if we look at the Act 1 index that caps our increases, it's based on the statewide average weekly wage and an inflation index, and both of those are in the current economy are going to be radically different numbers. So I think our Act 1 index this year was 2.6%. That could be a much lower number next year. So this isn't a one-year event that we're looking at. We're already talking about revisiting our capital plans. We're talking about, we know that we need 400 new room for 400 students at the high school, and that's something that we absolutely must do, but perhaps we could push off the other piece. We could defer the other piece of the high school project for some time. Perhaps we could defer some of the other projects that we've been talking about for Coopertown and Chatham Park. So the administration is going to be looking at everything over the next couple of weeks, and we will be continuing this discussion.
And the slide we have right there, the bottom number, $5 million, is our deficit. If we have a zero increase, and it might be bigger because of at 1% of loss in collection of real estate would be 980,000. So you'd be almost 6 million short.
And with the economy the way that it is, I mean, we have folks that are out of work now, and if that number continues to increase, then our delinquency rate could continue to increase. Any other questions or comments from the board regarding budget? Thanks, Bob. Next time we want good news. Hey,
sorry.
Who can remember an April 23rd where the Phillies hadn't lost a game? So, Next item is for information purposes only, the secretary to submit for insertion into the minutes the financial report as of March 31st, 2020. Do we need to review any of this information, Dr. Rushi, or is this just an informational item?
That's an informational item.
Okay. Next item is the bill list. I'll accept the motion to approve disbursements from the following funds as listed.
Bridget Wiedemann, I move it.
Jim Larson, second.
Moved in second. Any discussion? All in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Motion carries. Thank you. Next item is the proposed final budget that we just heard from, and just make sure everybody understands this is not the final budget. This is a work in process. I'll accept the motion to adopt the proposed final budget for fiscal year 2020-2021, totaling $133,399,640. This amount includes $800,000 in budgetary reserve. The proposed millage rate, 33.5791, an increase of 1.0486 mils, or 3.22% over the 2019-2020 millage rate of 32.5305.
Crispin moved.
Schwartz, second.
Moved in second. Any discussion? All in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Motion carries. Thank you. Next item, I'll accept the motion to approve the resolution to reappoint Bernice Clarke Dickerson to serve as trustee to the Board of Delaware County Community College for a 6-year term ending June 30th, 2026.
Larson moved.
Second, Fleischer.
Moved in second. Any discussion? All in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Motion carries. I'll accept a motion to approve the proposed agreement with CB Development Services, Inc. for owner's representation services for the pre-construction phase of the Haverford High School renovations project at an estimated cost of $76,500.
Move Schwartz.
Crispin, second.
Moved in second. Any discussion?
Are we in a position to talk about or consider perhaps putting this on hold given our financial situation, or is this too far along now? When I say this, I mean the whole project for the high school.
Given the fact that there's going to be 400 kids showing up at the high school, there's no room for them. We must proceed with this project.
We already borrowed 44 million. 32 of it basically is going for 32 or 33 is going for the Linwood Elementary. So that leaves 11 or 12 left over for phase 1 of the high school, which would be the addition. And we got this would come up, give your estimates, but it's probably about $10 million for that first phase. So we've already committed to the borrowing for phase 1. The issue probably would be, do we push off phase 2, or do the planning, but if it doesn't work out, we bid 2 projects, phase 1 and 2, and maybe not do 2 because we'd have to borrow again. And then also the climate control at 2 elementary schools has not been funded yet.
Okay.
Okay.
Thanks.
Did we vote on this item?
No, I was just going to say that the facility liaisons met earlier this week, and this was one of the things that we talked about was phasing of the high school project to work within borrowing that we have in hand.
Can we just have explained what phase 2 is? So phase 1 is for the 400 students for the addition. Rob or Larry, can you just explain what phase 2 is?
Phase 2 would be the common areas at the other end of the building, the music spaces, the fitness center, athletic spaces. So that's the part that we're talking about perhaps deferring.
Okay, because I remember, I think it was the last meeting that we had where we were talking about the facade as well of the high school, I believe it was. And so is that even a separate phase? Separate and beyond the I think the weightlifting room and the music space?
That will have to go into some phase. That, if you recall, that work was going to be assessed, and then it was going to be identified into 3 buckets, if you will. What needs to be, what needs to happen sooner rather than later, and what could occur at a later point in time. So those immediate needs will have to be identified and will have to go into either part 1 of the project or some capital, depending on the cost.
Okay, thank you.
You're welcome.
Any other questions or comments? And we do need to vote on this, yes? All in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Thank you. I'll accept a motion to accept the retirement as listed.
Moved, Fleischer.
Second.
Moved in second. Any discussion?
I would just like to congratulate Alice. I remember when she came to us, she ran that cafeteria with great style, and the woman can cook. So congratulations, Alice, and I wish you much good luck. Thank you.
Here. Thanks, Susan. All in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Motion carries. I'll accept the motion to approve the employment agreement of Robert Regal for the period of July 1st, 2020 through July 30th, 2021.
Moved, Fleischer.
Crispin, second.
Moved in second. Any discussion? All in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Congratulations, Bob. Good having you around for another year.
Bob, you sure you want to come back given the numbers?
Stay, Bob, please. Please stay.
Don't leave us.
I'm gonna earn my money this year. It's a challenge. It's a good challenge, I mean, for me, I feel like I gotta help, and gotta help us get through this. So it's.
Thanks, Bob.
We're glad you're here.
Appreciate that.
Thank you, Bob.
I'll accept a motion to approve the leave requests as listed.
Moved. Larson.
Second, Schwartz.
Second, Minji.
Moved and second. Any discussion? All
Just
in
a question.
Oh, go ahead.
Just a question about leaves of absence generally. I know there's allowance now if a staff member or a family member becomes affected by COVID-19 that they could be covered under FMLA. Would that also be something the board would have to approve? And I'm not talking about these specific cases. I don't know their circumstances. It's just more of a general FMLA question.
Yes, to the extent that we received new FMLA requests based on the new FFCRA amendments, we would bring them to you.
Okay, thank you.
Any other questions or comments? All in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Motion carries. I'll accept the motion to approve an educational service contract with the Pathway School for 1 student attending prorated from initial enrollment date of March 4th, 2020 at a cost not to exceed $52,000.
Fleischer moved.
Minji, second.
Moved in second. Any discussion? All in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Motion carries. Board reports. Sal, you've been pretty quiet tonight. Why don't we start with you?
I'm going to stay quiet. No report.
Okay.
Just virtually quiet.
Okay. Kristen?
Just stay safe, stay home if you can, and thank you to everyone who doesn't have the privilege of staying home or that they're working on the front lines. Yeah, that's it.
Amen. Antoinette?
Yeah, I just want to say, again, my gratitude to Dr. Rushi and her team for, getting us all through this, and also to all of the teachers. I can tell how hard everyone is working, and that there are a lot of adjustments being made. Everything that parents are going through, teachers are going through, but they're also teaching. And so really appreciate the work from everyone from the technology team at our district, to the folks that are delivering lunches and everyone in between. Thank you. And, as I've said before, let's just all have patience with each other. It's the only thing that's going to get us through this. So thanks.
Susan?
Well, there have been no DCIU meetings. There were a couple of Zoom meetings, and all I hear about is how good Haverford is doing with their educational piece. So I congratulate Dr. Rushi, Mrs. Saska, Sarah Christensen, and every single teacher. We are, as always, working as hard as we can and doing the best we can, and it's appreciated. I hope everyone knows that it's appreciated. Flexibility being the word for 2020. So thank you to all. Thanks, Dr. Rushi.
Laura?
So a few different things. I know it came up at our last meeting. Someone had asked me, I think it was you actually, Dr. Rushi, what St. Joe's was doing. St. Joe's has moved fully online for the entire summer now. So that was the most recent update there. Still no word on fall, but I think that many other colleges and universities are doing the same thing for summer. So if I hear anything about fall, I'll let you know. But that was one of the things that just happened this week. To be an economist for a second, the jobs numbers came out today, and there's a reason that we're called the dismal science. It's because the jobs report was really bad. So today, this is national, 4.4 more reports of unemployment, which brings the national total up to 26 million. There's a week lag of those numbers, which means these are the numbers from last week, not including this week. And the unemployment rate only includes people who are actively seeking work. So people who are considered discouraged workers, who are no longer seeking work, or people who were not able to file unemployment claims are not included in those numbers. So I would imagine that the numbers are probably closer nationally to 30 million. Because the New York, New Jersey, Pennsylvania area has been hit especially hard. I would imagine a lot of that is coming out of our area. And as I said, I will do what I can do to talk to some people at the Bureau of Labor Statistics and see if I can get more specific numbers for the Philadelphia area and maybe even like Delco. The problem with labor data is it's often a pretty long lag between when the data are collected and when they're reported. So, but it's bad. It's very, very bad. I feel like we've heard the word unprecedented a lot. This is probably the worst unemployment situation ever. So I think that sort of echoing what Larry had said earlier, it's definitely should not be underestimated, the economic effects of what's happening right now. So sorry to be dismal, but there it is. In any case, on a more positive note, my husband is an automotive technician and would like to remind everybody, please drive your cars at least once a week so that your car batteries don't die. So there you go. Keeping the towing industry in business is what's happening right now. So every week, drive your car around the block. Thank you. So.
Thank you. Ari.
I just want to say I feel very fortunate to live in a great community. We're going to get through this. We're going to stick together. There's a lot of green lights out there. So there's a lot of people having difficult times, and let's look at the green lights and recognize that we live in this wonderful community. We're going to stick together and get through this.
Thanks. Dave?
Sure. I just want to say thanks to all the frontline workers. Our neighbor is actually a nurse at Temple, and hearing what she's going through and what they're doing every day is both inspiring and also, tragic. What's really happening there. So I want to thank all of them. And Elizabeth, I want to thank you for mentioning that, students in Haverford, unlike other areas, are actually upset. My daughter's one of them. Not by missing proms and dances and socialization, but by missing school. Most students, they hear school's out for the year, do backflips. My daughter needed grief counseling. So that is, a testament really, I think, to the teachers and the staff here. So again, Dr. Rushi, our educators, thank you very much. For parents, I know there are more questions right now than answers. That's with everybody right now. So bear with us. We thank you for your, for your emails of support, and we'll keep on keeping on. We'll get through this. Thank you very much.
Bridget?
Just wanted to echo my appreciation to the administration and the community, the students. It was great to see our student reporters on the board meeting today, and looking down the panelists, I see at least the high school ones have stuck with us here till the end, so thank you for that. I mentioned that we had a facilities and a finance liaisons meeting, so there's a lot of work that the board is doing behind the scenes, kind of dealing with some of the immediate circumstances and starting to think about the longer term planning. And it's also been interesting to participate in a real kind of surge of collaboration among board members from throughout Delaware County and the kind of southeastern Pennsylvania that are in the PSBA. There are now weekly leadership calls, looking at advocacy issues and just kind of new practices and what people are experiencing, and that kind of sharing and collaboration has been great to participate in. And to the community, there are a lot of issues that are affecting public education, the funding and the kind of the regulations and the consequences of this closure. And I encourage folks to follow groups like PA Schools Works and others that are looking out for the interests of public education across the state. And there's ways to get involved and to speak up about how these changes are affecting you and what we need to see in the future to support our schools. And then just wanted to add just one note about some of the times of change and some disappointments. Tomorrow would have been the junior prom, and I know I was looking forward to getting some pictures of my daughter and her friends all dressed up for a night on the town. So I hope that we soon get to see some of those pictures of special moments when people are, the students are together and celebrating. But know that as disappointed as the kids are, that the whole community kind of aches for these moments that are lost at this time, and look forward to when we can have celebrations again.
Thank you, everybody. The board met in executive session prior to the public meeting to have an opportunity to review personnel matters and to review collective bargaining negotiations. Our next regular public board meeting is scheduled to be held on May 7th, 2020 via Zoom like this meeting. And I'll remind members of the public that if they would like input, that they need to either call the superintendent's office the day of the meeting and put their names in, or send us email questions that would be read at the public meeting. I thank the folks who attended virtually. Thank all the board members. Dr. Rushi, do you have anything else, or shall I look around for a gavel?
You may look for a gavel. We'll have to find you a virtual gavel.
How about a stapler?
I'll do the job.
Thanks, everybody. Have a good night and stay safe.
I think we have to move.
Motion to adjourn?
Second.
Snodgrass moved.
Thank you, everybody. We're out of here.